Hey guys, welcome back to Heiko Prints. Today I want to take a few minutes and explain my version of how I do Z offset setting on a 3D printer that runs Klipper. And I want to explain how I do Z offset. So let's talk about, in general terms, what is Z offset? Z offset is a correction factor or a corrective adjustment to the relative position between your extruder your hot end nozzle and your print bed. So when in your slicer you set a certain first layer height, let's say 0.3 millimeters, then the machine, based on the input that you have given the machine during your Z offset, it will move to a position above your print bed and start printing. If this position above your print bed, considering that we just told the printer to do a 0.3 millimeter first layer height, if this position is too high, then the first layer will not adhere to your bed very well. If you have fed your Klipper configuration, your printer information that is such that the nozzle is too close to your printer bed, then the first layer will be not 0.3 millimeters, but it will be squished too much, and that is also negative. So you want the printer to print a layer that is 0.3 millimeters. And the Klipperized machine, the little single board computer that does all the magic and runs the pixies around, calculates based on your adjustments, on your Z offset, where it needs to be to achieve that. If your Z offset is incorrect, then this first layer will fail. It will either be too squished or it will be not squished enough and it will not adhere to your bed. So now if you look around on the internet, there's lots of Reddit posts and there's stuff on GitHub and there is stuff on just documentation for Klipper. There are videos of the printer manufacturers that will tell you how to do the Z offset. And in very many cases, it always involves a piece of paper. The part that I don't understand is why this is such a widely accepted concept that your Z offset, so the distance between your nozzle and your print bed, is always the thickness of a piece of paper or maybe a double layer of paper or like a business card thickness. Why that is so accepted? Actually, the only video where I have heard someone talk about the same concept as I will explain here today, in very broad stroke, short, like 2 sentences, is the Australian guy from Maker Muse. He mentioned that before. So I do not use paper. I use a feeler gauge. And how I correct the height of my nozzle in relationship to the print bed with a Z offset function in the main cell user interface is by placing the nozzle at a specific height above the bed, at least, where the printer thinks it should be. So I tell the printer to go to a height above the print bed of 0.3 millimeters. And then I bought an extra long feeler gauge, so I have, lots of flexibility here. I take a 0.3 millimeter feeler gauge. I place my nozzle, Z-axis 0.3 millimeters. Then my printer drives the nozzle to what it thinks 0.3 millimeter should be. And then I stick my feeler gauge in there. And then I will find out, oh, it's way too loose or it's too tight. And then I use the Z offset correction section on the user interface and move the nozzle either up or down until my nozzle pinches the feeler gauge ever so slightly, just so you feel there is some contact there. It doesn't need to be much. And then I save the config. And I know this was very theoretical and just in words, Heiko rambling in front of the camera. Let's just do it together. All right. So I have set up my mainsail user interface of my printer with webcam. So yeah, let's point that down a little bit like that so that you can see me talking, but you can also see what I'm doing on the screen. So first thing, let's do temperature. We're going to set the nozzle temperature to 200. And we're setting the bed to 60. Those are, for PLA, pretty standard values. We let this heat up real quick. In the meantime, we want to home the printer. And as you can see, it's doing that. It's running all the axes. And now it's going to probe the bed, right? And the probe is the inductive type. It reacts to my metal print bed. And it assumes, okay, I know where I'm at. And here's the Z height, so to speak. Then, I don't know if you can see my pointer here. Z is now setting at 10 millimeters above the bed. So Z 10 millimeters is literally the distance between the nozzle and the bed. At least that's what the Klipper computer assumes, right? If I would now put it to 0, it should touch the bed. Since we have a fancy magnetic metal print sheet with like some PEI coating on there, we don't always want to touch down right onto the bed, because if our Z offset is wrong and the nozzle actually goes too low, it might damage the bed or it damages the brass nozzle, and we don't want to have that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it, you could set it at 0.5 millimeters if you wanted to. But here in my case, we're going to use 0.3 millimeters. 0.3 millimeters, and press enter. Oh, and there's already some oozing going on. You got to make sure that you don't have any filament on your nozzle, because that might affect a error in your Z offset. So now the print head has moved to what it thinks, or what the computer thinks 0.3 millimeters is. Now we're going to take a feeler gauge. Where is it? There's 1.3 millimeter feeler gauge in here, and we're going to shove this between the bed and the nozzle. Yep. And that also kind of pushes if there's a little ooze of filament, it will push that out of the way. So now I have my 0.3 millimeter feeler gauge between the nozzle and the bed, and it's too loose. So now let's look at the screen here real quick. Below this, below the section where you can just move your axes around. So if you want to move your x-axis or y-axis around, you can just click on plus 10 and it just moves there. Below that section is a Z offset. Currently, we're at 0.3 millimeters and my Z offset is 0. So the corrective little incremental movements that will correct the position of your nozzle in relationship to the bed. So as I just said, the computer thinks it's at 0.3 millimeters above your print bed, but my feeler gauge just confirmed that it is a little high because the feeler gauge is loose in there. There is no friction whatsoever. We don't want much friction, but we want to feel that the nozzle and the bed both make contact with this thing. Currently, we're too high. So with the Z offset section down here, you make a correction. So the computer will continue to think it's at 0.3 millimeters, but where that reference is, where that 0.3 position is, you will correct by either minus, bringing the nozzle down, or by plus, bringing the nozzle up. So feeler gauge in here, it's always a little complicated to do. My left hand. My pointer here is right on minus 0.01 millimeters. That's 1/100th of a millimeter. So we're right there. I have my feeler gauge there, and I'm just going to click. So now the nozzle is coming down little increments of 1/100th of a millimeter until I feel that I have some friction. Oh, we're getting there. One more. No, not yet. Oh. So now I have ever so slightly a little bit of friction between the nozzle and the print bed. Now I could potentially do another 0.005 of a millimeter. Let's do that. That's 0.005, right? So 0.005 of a millimeter, just to increase the friction ever so slightly. So that feels pretty good to me. You will have to experiment with that a little bit. So we just made a incremental correction of where that 0.3 millimeter is. If you look up here, position absolute, we haven't moved the z-axis. It's still saying 0.3 millimeters. We just corrected where that 0.3 millimeters is. And we actually, right above in parentheses, it shows a relative position. From our little incremental step downs, it will still show 0.3 millimeters, but we have corrected where 0.3 millimeters is, right? Right above the Z offset section, and we just moved it down by 0.085 millimeters, is a clear, so we could bring it back to 0, or a save button. If I click on save right now, it will do save config, yes. Then it does a quick little restart. Klipper report startup, and here we go, initialize. And so now we have to home again because now the printer just lost its brain. It doesn't know where it is anymore. If I now rehome the whole thing, first thing the Klipper always does is raises the tool head so you're not scraping your tool head across your bed. And then it homes again with a nozzle, not with a nozzle, but with the inductive probe. And it moves to where it thinks 10 millimeters above the bed is. Now we're going to put it back. Oh, temperatures, by the way, they were also turned off. So we're just going to re-engage the heating here, just so that we have the same conditions. We bring the temperature back up where it was. That only takes a few seconds. As you guys know, the extruder or the hot end really heats up quick, and the bed was still at 58.6 degrees, and it's slowly coming back up to 60. So we're already back there. So now I'm going to use my keyboard again, put 0.3 millimeters in here. It moves the nozzle to where it thinks 0.3 is. And we again use the 0.3 millimeter feeler gauge and shove it right in between the bed and the nozzle. Again, pushing a little bit of the oozing filament out. There is friction. I still find this a little too loose. So sometimes you have to do this a couple times just until, you get it just so. I'm just going to bring it down maybe another hundredth of a millimeter. Yeah, we're already there. That feels pretty good. Maybe let's give it another. Yeah, this is perfect. So we just did another slight correction. This will be followed up by another save config. And then it reinitializes. We're going to do that like 2 or 3 times.
5 minutes later.
So we don't need to do any more adjustments. Currently, the print head is exactly 0.3 millimeters above the print bed, at least in that location. And now if you start a print and the slicer, here, let's look at a slicer real quick. Slicer, I use Prusa slicer. And here it is. Let's open this wide. So if you go into your print settings, you always have first layer height and then you have layer height. That's all the subsequent layers, right? Here in this case, first layer height is 0.3 millimeters. Instead of just talking about it, I think we're just gonna, here, I think I have a thumb drive. Oh, here we go. Okay, there it is. And in here we have some print projects. Oh no, why it opens that. There is a first layer hex, which we're going to be using here. And we're going to scale this up a little bit. We're going to do, what are we going to do? We're going to do 200% of the size, or 220%. And here as well. We don't want to make it thicker. That's why I took the scale factor off here. All right, now we have a big ol' hex on here, right? So we can locate that in the middle. We can slice it. Now it did a slicing. There is a little bit of a, yeah, let's see that we don't have a brim or a, I don't want to have any, no outer brim. It just has a skirt around it. That's good enough. So that's good. Let's transfer it over. It will do a Klipper advanced mesh and purging. What that means is it will only mesh the area where you actually print on, which then brings the mesh points closer together and make it more accurate. So it gets a more accurate picture of how hill and dale your print bed is. So if you run Klipper in some shape or form, Sonic Pad, maybe you have a Sovel printer and you just bought one of those Sovel Klipper pads, or you have a Raspberry Pi running Klipper. If you don't use Kemp, get it, install it, configure it. It's great. So let's upload this to the printer here. So the transfer over to my printer is already done, so we can close this up. And now you see it's homing. We're already at temperature, so that's pretty good. So that was just the Z homing there for a second. And now it does the Kemp mesh, Klipper adaptive meshing and purging, okay? So that's what that stands for. So now it really only meshes the area where the print object is gonna be. And as you can see up here in the status section, I actually have a visual representation of the part on my print bed, which is really cool. Let's say you have 20 parts on your print bed. It shows 20 little parts, and if something goes sideways and one of your 20 parts tips over, you can exclude that and keep printing the other ones. And that is actually pretty nifty. Now we're gonna see if my probing that we did, no, not my probing, my Z offsetting to 0.3 millimeters above the bed. So we're just correcting the height above the bed with a feeler gauge. And the correction is done down here in this Z offset section, if that is a good idea or not. All right, guys, I was just talking to myself. So I peeled the build sheet off. Here is the part that we just printed. I already pulled the brim off, just one layer brim. Or skirt, I should say, it's a skirt. So white is a little bit bad color to show details. But the texture from the build sheet is nicely imprinted on the first layer here. And then the individual lines adhere to each other really well, so I cannot pull it apart. And overall, this turned out really well. Instead of using a piece of paper, I set my print head, my nozzle, to be exactly zeroed. So if I punch in 0, nozzle touches bed. If I punch in 0.3 millimeters or 0.4 millimeters, a 0.4 millimeter feeler gauge will fit in there. And if it doesn't, then I use the Z offset section down in the main cell user interface and bring it down and make it just so. And then save the config, and then it's pretty much good to go. And if your printer is very stable and it doesn't lose its adjustment or position very easily, you can do the Z offset adjustment, and as long as you don't switch to a different build sheet, you should be good to go for many, many prints. You don't have to do Z offset every single time. So occasionally, maybe if I change a nozzle, clean a nozzle, maybe if I change something on the printer, mess with some adjustments, after that I will do a Z offset. If I don't do that, I just leave it alone. And yeah, it works. So give it a try. I know this is a controversial topic. That's why there are so many videos out there about Z offset. Don't rip me apart. I'm also just a 3D printing hobbyist. I've been called names on forums, and I have been told I'm ignorant and whatnot, but this is just my experience. This is what I've experimented with, and it works for me, and I just thought I'd share that with you guys. So there it is. You guys take care. I see you in the next one. Bye.